Hello and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast. I'm Phil Bear and I'm the ringleader of this here circus, coming to you from up in the mountains just outside of Denver, Colorado. And it's gorgeous weather outside. I would love to be out in it, but this is important that we do this podcast today. Today I'm going to have an extremely special guest, and he's one of my favorite people in all the world, to be real honest with you. He's funny, he's articulate, he's wise, he's extremely knowledgeable, and he goes by the moniker the Faithiest Atheist. So I want to welcome Richard Suttles, the Faithiest Atheist, and he's in his car today.
Yes, I am.
And but all the technical details are actually working really well. So say hello and give us a little bit about your background, and we're going to jump right into our topic.
Okay, yes, and I'll be really quick because I think this is my fourth time on the show. But yeah,
Yeah.
the Faithiest Atheist. The only real link you need to look for is on YouTube. I'm sorry, on Facebook. I do have a YouTube, but it only has a few videos. So mostly I'm on Facebook. I work in the counterterrorism world. I've done that for 30 years. I walked away from my Southern Baptist Christianity as a young man. I've been a non-believer for about 30 years, but I don't really attack Christianity so much as I just try to critique some bad ideas, and I'll give credit to where I see some good ideas. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about you. You're rather unique. There aren't very many atheists who are so gracious, so open-minded, and so fair-minded and balanced. And so I definitely appreciate that. I have to be honest, uh, we Christians are all praying for you. We hope you'll return to the Christian faith, and we love you, but we're not going to criticize you if you don't. We're still gonna interact, and we're still gonna have a great friendship. And at the end of the day, that's really, I think, what's going to matter to you. I think how Christians treat atheists is a serious issue, in my opinion, and that's really what I wanted to talk about today. So
Okay.
let me introduce this topic real quickly without a whole lot of additional debris flying
Okay.
through the air. And that is that I have seen recently, I have seen some debates between Christians and atheists, or just theists and atheists, but it's mostly Christians and atheists. And in the debates, one of the tactics that the Christians will use is they will bring up what's in Romans chapter 1 in the Bible. And Romans chapter 1, in verse 20, around the 20th verse or something like that, says that people are without excuse, that God's attributes and his nature are plain for everyone to see, and that people are are suppressing the truth in their unrighteousness. And when it says that that God's attributes, and actually his existence for that matter, are plain for all to see, what sometimes the Christians in these debates will say to the atheist is, Mr. Atheist, you know that God exists. You're just suppressing that truth. And what I always cringe whenever I hear that. I think that's irresponsible. I think it's unproductive. And I think it's actually, in a way, it's kind of insulting to the atheist, to be real honest with you. And I don't recommend that Christians do that. If I ever do it, I want you to shoot me with the Romans 1 gun
Okay.
or whatever. But I mean, if I did it, I know that you, Richard, I know that you would be gracious to me if I ever did. But I'm sure you'd call me out, and I hope you would, because I just think it is so inappropriate and unproductive. And part of the reason for that is that Romans 1 says that the wrath of God is pointed at people who suppress the truth. But it doesn't say every human being on the planet who doesn't believe in God is suppressing the truth and it doesn't say that God's attributes are plain to every human being. Well, I think they can. I think we can say they are plain if you believe in God and if you believe in Christianity. I think you can say that God's attributes are plain to everybody. But the Bible doesn't specifically say that all unbelievers know that God exists. The Bible just says that his existence is clear to those people. It's that information is available to everyone. That's what the Bible is claiming at that point. But these Christians are taking it a step further, and they're saying, Mr. Atheist, you know that God exists. Come on, you just know that God exists. You're just suppressing the truth. Just admit it. Admit that you're suppressing the truth. And that is such a cringeworthy debate tactic, in my view. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to get your perspective on this, Richard, and because I think that you've been shot with a Romans 1 gun before yourself.
Plenty of times, yes.
So I would like to know what your reaction to that is whenever that happens.
It's usually a good natured. I'll usually say something good naturedly. Well, the words aren't very good natured, but I say it in a good natured tone, which is I say, well, okay, the conversation's over. If it's a debate, I'm like, okay, well, we have the winner then. If I already know it, then there's no sense in debating. We're done, and you win. And the same
Right.
thing if we're arguing, on online or in person, and the person is just kind of being belligerent about it, then I'm like, okay, then we're done because I already know the answer, and you're the winner. Um,
How does it make you feel?
at this point, I'm immune to it because I understand it. Um, but not only that, I do really understand what's behind that. Yeah, again, I'm a non-believer, so my answer to this is different than probably many other people's answer. But again, because I focus on radicalization, my specialty is specifically on the neurology and the sociology behind radicalization, and what makes people to get so intent on the thing they care about that they're willing to hurt other people and to hate other people and dehumanize other people. Because I'm so familiar with that, I do know. Okay, I think that I know what's behind all this, which is that when you get to that point, when you find something that's sacred to you, and by the way, you don't have to be religious. If you're an atheist, you can call it unassailable or inviolable, something that you're just like, this is it, this is the answer, and anyone who doesn't see it is just wrong. When you get to that point, you automatically assume that everybody else is missing something intellectually and morally. Like you're missing. There's a flaw in you, morally and intellectually. Those two platforms are your big thing that you're like, those two things you're missing, and you just automatically assume that about somebody. So I have no doubt that every religion and every worldview has something like that memorialized somewhere. And in your guys' case, Romans 1 is a great example of that. Like you already know, and it's
Well,
so
and
intuitive, it's so automatic that even if there was no
right.
Christianity, people would still be like, well, I'm right. You just don't want to admit it. That's very normal,
Right.
intuitive things to say.
And that I'm very familiar with logical fallacies, and that when Christians do that to atheists, they are committing a glaring logical fallacy at that point. And I'm sure you know what that fallacy is. It's a fallacy of begging the question. Because if you're in a debate, and the debate is the Bible true? Is Christianity true? Does God exist? If I say to my debating opponent, you know that God exists, come on, admit
Right.
it. What I'm doing is I'm assuming that my side of the debate is true and I'm so lazy that I'm not even willing to provide any evidence for it. All I'm doing is a cop out. I'm just saying, yeah, you know that God exists. Come on. And it is to, to be real honest with you, Richard, I would call it childish. Because what I think, if I ever did that, what I think that I would be doing is I would be insulting your intelligence if I did that.
Well,
And
and also, I just think it's automatic thinking. 'Cause, one big thing I like to preach, and I use that Southern Baptist language even as a non-believer because I was raised Southern Baptist. But one thing I like to preach is that we do have something called automatic thinking, which does a whole bunch of our thinking, and we don't realize it. We think like, oh, I'm glad I thought of that, but really, non-consciously, sometimes things are just pushed to the forefront, and you say it, and then later you kind of retell the story to yourself. And
right,
so, because of that, atheists can do it too. Atheists can be like, okay, come on, there's not really a God. This is make believe. You're just, now you're stuck and you want to save face, so you're trying to defend it, but you've already convinced yourself that it's not true. We do that just maybe just as much. I don't know. We're all human, so in my mind, it's more of a human thing than a religious or an atheist thing.
Yeah, and now there may be a Christian or two who are listening either to the recording or the live broadcast, and they might be thinking, well, Phil, don't you believe that that's true? Don't you believe that Romans 1 is inspired scripture? Don't you believe that Romans 1 is the truth and that it's God breathed? And my reply is, yeah. I mean, I do believe it's true, but the problem is that I can't just throw that in the face of an atheist,
Right.
just raw, because Romans 1 was not written for unbelievers. Romans 1 was written for believers. Romans 1 was designed to give us some insight as to what people do with the truth. And by the way, Romans 1, even though there is some universal language in the Bible about unbelievers, Romans 1 does not specifically say that all unbelievers are suppressing the truth in their wickedness or unrighteousness. It doesn't say all unbelievers. All it says is the wrath of God is pointed at the people who do suppress the truth. That's what Romans 1 is saying. I don't know that you can draw the conclusion that all people do this. Richard, I do not believe that you are suppressing the truth about God.
Um,
and,
I,
and
Go
because
ahead.
you're one of the most open-minded people. Your mission in life is not to suppress the truth. Your mission in life is to get people to understand one another and to pursue truth on an honest basis instead of on a dishonest basis. And now if we wanted to get technical with a Christian, we might say, well, okay, Richard might be suppressing the truth. But the problem is that if we simply assume that about Richard, then we have lost Richard. We've lost our hope of reaching Richard because Richard's going to shut down, and I don't blame him. He deserves to turn us off at that point. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, like, let's assume that Christianity was true for a second, and let's just say it is true, and everyone who doesn't believe it, to include other religions, are just suppressing the truth. Let's use the flat Earth analogy, because flat Earth is growing, despite now with satellites, even the fact that we need satellites to talk to each other uh, around the world, and all the other planets are planet shaped. Flat Earth is growing. It's a growing belief. Whether it's religious or not, it's a growing thing. Um, and the people who are in that deep into it will say, it's true, and people just don't want to believe it, and they're suppressing the truth. Um, and they'll never be able. Here, the funny thing about the flat Earth is they'll never be able to show us the edge of the Earth. It'll never happen because our planet is planet shaped. So, but how do we deal with them? When you're talking to someone who's deep into the flat Earth, do you say, the planet's planet shape? Come on, you can't do it because they're going to be angry and upset. So,
Right.
why is it like that? I don't know, but they are absolutely a growing belief system. They're passionate about it. They think that us, the planet-shaped planet people, are suppressing the truth. So all you can do is have pizza with them and hang out together and talk about other things. And then when they go off in their flat Earth thing, say, oh, okay. So just assuming that Christianity is true and that I don't even have a case to make for atheism, uh, even in that situation, you probably don't want to say, come on, grow up,
Right.
because it won't work.
Right. And by the way, speaking of the flat Earth, I read a story somewhere where there was a headline in the Flat Earth newsletter that said that flat Earth ideology is gaining popularity all over the globe.
Yes, I've seen and heard about things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good analogy. What we're talking about, Richard, is we're talking about basic respect. And And I think it's disrespectful if I say to you, Richard, you know God exists. Come on, you know He exists. And and the other thing that we need to recognize, and this is for Christians, Christians need to realize and understand and acknowledge and be aware of the fact that Paul, when he spoke to the Athenians on Mars Hill, he didn't say, all right, you guys, you know that this unknown God exists. You're just suppressing the truth. Paul never used that as an evangelistic strategy, right? Paul was approachable. He preached the gospel. He preached it boldly, but he preached it with a whole cast of sincerity. He didn't he didn't put his hearers down. He didn't criticize them. He didn't bully them into belief. And that's what's happening when we use this Romans 1 gun and we shoot people with it. And the other thing that we need to recognize too is that in Romans chapter 1, Paul doesn't say the wrath of God is pointed at people who suppress the truth, so you don't have to respect those people because look at what they're doing. They're suppressing the truth. So you don't have to respect those people. You can just point, laugh, and openly mock all day long, and that's okay because they're suppressing the truth and they're not intellectually honest. I mean, Paul never said that. Paul was speaking to Christians, and he was not speaking to non-Christians, and so I really want to encourage Christians not to take that approach because you're going to lose the person that you're talking to. And not only that, but the person you're talking to, they're going to talk about this to their friends. They're going to say, you want to know how I was treated by those Christians during that debate? And so it's just going to spread like wildfire, and we're going to lose. We're going to lose the culture. We're going to lose our reputation. And so, yeah, I just I just can't stress enough that we need to be wise and we need to be smart about this. And the other thing is that everyone needs to be willing to admit that they could be mistaken. And Tim Stratton and I did a podcast a few months ago on Calvinism. And one of the first things we said during that podcast was, guys, we want to get this out of the way right away from the get-go. We could be wrong. And if I say I could be wrong, but then I present my evidence, you're going to take my evidence more seriously and you're going to take me more seriously if I am willing to admit that I could be mistaken, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add something is that it's weird when you're doing a channel. And if you are saying I could be wrong and you try to be humble, you might lose some fans because some fans are like, no, man, this is clear. This is done. And this guy's saying I might be wrong. That sounds weak. That sounds like he's not sure. So everyone who has a channel or they're trying to make a page or develop a presence, you're in a weird spot because by being intellectually humble and willing to try to engage respectfully, you're risking losing some fans who are looking for you to be belligerent. And, case in point, some of the most I almost said faitheists, but some of the most famous atheists, some of the most famous atheists are completely belligerent. And they're like, oh my God, these guys are such idiots. I can't believe it's the year 2024 and they're still believing in this crap. Those guys have millions of followers. So, if you're a non-believer and you're trying to raise up in the world and you're hearing me, I might be giving you the kind of advice that, keeps you from getting 10 million followers. But I will say this, I don't want 10 million followers. If that's what it takes, I don't want it. I'd rather be like this and, it gets me wherever it gets me because I think this is more productive.
Yeah. Well, and this is a little bit awkward because I think that I can say that I'm certain about something and say I could be mistaken at the same time. I think I can say that. I think I can say both of those.
Absolutely. I've met plenty of Christians and atheists, mostly personally, and people who aren't who aren't trying to do pages and stuff, who will just say, "Look, I honestly can't think of a way that I could be wrong, but I do understand that it's possible that I'm
Yeah.
wrong about this. That's perfectly normal."
And I always say I could be mistaken, but if you think I'm mistaken and you need to give me a reason why I'm mistaken, you can't just say, well, Phil said he could be mistaken, so that
Right.
settles it. He's mistaken,
Right.
and then move on to the next topic. You
Right.
know, people have to actually come up with an argument. And I mentioned to you on your page today that I have been in situations where I have discovered that I was mistaken because a fellow Christian pointed, Richard, I have had atheists correct some of my mistaken ideas before,
Oh my gosh, you're ruined. You're doomed to hell now.
right? Because they really were mistaken ideas. See, just because somebody is an atheist doesn't mean that they can't gain insights about my theology. And what happened was that the atheist pointed out, Phil, if you believe the Bible, then you need to believe this because this is what the Bible teaches you, and I think you're missing something in your own Bible, Phil. And I had to be humble enough to accept that I was missing something in my own Bible. So I wasn't basing my shift in belief on the word of an atheist or the authority of an atheist. The atheist was really being honest and saying, Phil, if you believe in the Bible, then you should believe this. And I don't think you're interpreting it correctly. And they were a former Christian. They had studied the Bible as well, before. But a lot of atheists study the Bible very, very, very closely. And there are some
Yeah.
atheists who know the Bible better than some Christians do, or
Yeah.
sometimes better than even most Christians. Biblical illiteracy is a huge problem in Christianity.
And I want
So,
to say, because I made a post about this today, um, and my post is basically saying neither side is dealing with the Bible anymore. And I said it like that, sort of as a punchline and sort of as a shock value. A lot of my posts, I'm going for the shock value rather than telling the perfect truth. But I do think there's some truth to this: is that neither atheists or Christians are really going by the Bible anymore. Whether that's good or whether that's correct or not, or whether that's good or bad, um, I do see a lot of people who are like, you can read the Bible to me all you want, but I still say that God says this, and the other one's like, no, you're wrong, and you need to read the Bible, and no, you need to read the Bible, or you need to learn philosophy, or you need to learn metaphysics, and they're two Christians talking to each other. So I think in many cases, we're kind of all off on our own, and we've kind of abandoned sources as a way to persuade each other.
well, don't you think that is partly the result of the influence of postmodernism in our society?
Um, yeah, okay, to a degree, because I think postmodernism is often oversold. Do you know Professor Tawa Anderson? You ever heard of him? He's a Christian scholar.
Mm-mm.
He's a Christian scholar. I just met him last year, or was it earlier this year? It was earlier this year at an apologetics conference, and he gave me his book called "Why Believe," and he does a whole chapter on the rise of postmodernism, and he gives like a history lesson about how it started and why it's effective. But he also said something towards the end, which I agree with, which is what he said is, if you meet somebody who's a postmodernist, you'll discover soon enough that they're not really a postmodernist because they're gonna have things that they see as absolute truths. So yeah,
Right.
postmodernism is uh, increasing, but at the same time, every time you meet somebody who's an advocate for it, you're going to find something that they actually believe in, that they don't want to budge on, that they don't think is they think is unassailable, almost
Mm-hmm.
sacred. So, and I agree with that. So, yeah, it's growing, but it might be growing in name only.
Well, I think the influence though is still powerful, whether it's growing or not,
Uh-huh.
whether it's thriving or not, because I have met Christians who will actually tell me that they're not interested in reading the Bible. I just want to believe in Jesus. I'm just a Jesus follower. I just follow Jesus. That's all. That's all I don't care what the apostle Paul said. I don't care what Peter said. I don't care what James said. I don't care what John said. I just follow Jesus. And there are red letter Christians, by the way, who think that the only thing inspired in Scripture is what Jesus said. So that dismisses the rest of the New Testament as well. But there are people who will not even read the Gospels and just say, "I just believe in Jesus. If he wants me to know something, if he wants to teach me something, he'll teach me. He'll teach me something. He'll
Yeah.
just put it into my heart, into my head, into my mind through osmosis." And it just isn't the way it works. But you're right. I think there is such a huge trend away from grounding our beliefs. And I have said repeatedly, and Christians don't like to hear this, but I've said repeatedly that Christians are notorious for being the worst epistemologists on the planet.
So,
Christians
go ahead.
Christians will sit there and say, "I know that I know that I know that I know." Have you ever heard Christians say that?
Yes.
And then what follows what they say they know is false.
Right.
And I'm like, then no, you don't know that because it's not true. You can't know something that's false. What were you going to say?
And now I forgot it because of what you were just saying. Um, uh, it seemed like it fell away from me just as we were talking about what
Well,
the
I was
examples.
talking about I just believe in Jesus. I don't want to read the
Oh,
Bible. I just
yeah, that reminds me. There's like a George Barna group. So here in Arizona, so I live and work in Phoenix, and we have Christian University. I forget the name of it, but the George Barna group has developed this cultural center, which does a lot of research on Christians and what is happening with Christians and evangelicals. And of course, a lot of you guys have heard about his report that says that Bible believing Christians were down to 6%. And that stat might be 5 years old. I heard Natasha Crane. I went to another apologetics conference. And again, people who don't know me might not realize I go to church more than you do. Very likely, if you're a Christian, I probably spend more time with Christian scholars and pastors and Bible groups than you do. Um, but at this apologetics conference last year, Natasha Crane said that 2019 stat might be 4% now. That Bible believing Christians might be down to 4%. Um,
Are you talking about people who identify as Bible believing Christians, or people that where there's empirical evidence that they're Bible believing Christians?
yeah, they'll report like in the research questionnaire. It'll say, do you believe Jesus is the only way, or do you believe? And so things that the Bible clearly says are this way, the people will say, no, I'm this way. Maybe
Okay,
they're responding in a way that makes them more culturally acceptable. It could be, but yeah, that's how they're determining that.
okay,
But
yeah,
but my point is that postmodernism thing you're talking about, and he just issued a report. The George Barna Group issued a report. I think it was today that said evangelicals are more likely to be swayed and changed by culture than they are to influence culture. And this is coming from an
right,
evangelical who's just looking at the stats.
yeah.
And I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of evangelicals who now, and I know we've switched the topic 7 times since we started this, uh,
That's okay.
but and I got to run here soon. But I know a lot of evangelicals now that I don't hear from about the Bible, and I don't hear about Jesus. I hear about what Ben Shapiro says that day. So like the podcasts are taking over, and I think it's because. And by the way, I'm not picking on just evangelicals here because Lord knows, and I'm an atheist saying Lord knows that the left side is doing this too. But people are following podcasts more than anything else because the podcast comes on 5 times a day. And if I hear a passionate intellectual telling me his worldview 5 times a day, and I start to care about him, then pretty soon I might be preaching what he's saying rather than what I'm supposed to be saying.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
so I think that's happening, for good or bad. I think that's happening to you guys as well.
Well, I would call for Christians to do three things. I would call for Christians to stop being biblically illiterate, if that's what you are. That we need to start studying the Bible. A lot of Christians need to start studying the Bible a whole lot more than they really are. And the second thing I would call for is I would call for churches to establish an apologetics ministry at the local church level. Because I think the reason why we have lost the culture and the reason why we are more influenced by the culture than we are influencing the culture is because there's a lack of apologetics component in the church. And I think you would agree, Richard, whether you believe in Christianity or not, I think you would agree that if someone wants to be serious about Christianity, there should be an apologetics component at the local level and where people live in their church, not just somehow out here in a podcast somewhere or in an organization somewhere or in a conference somewhere. It needs to happen at the local level in the local churches.
Yeah,
So,
and I'll give another warning to add to that to make it worse. I suspect that apologetics is going to come to mean whatever a podcast wants. So that apologetics will split off, and that you might be following an apologetics that's more prosperity, and then another apologetics that's more political, and then another apologetics that's something else, and they'll be based on things that you won't even hear in the Bible, and they'll still be saying God and Jesus, and they'll still say they're apologists, but they'll be doing something else, and
yeah.
they'll feel righteous, and they'll feel like they're doing the right thing, so they're not grifters.
Hmm.
That's a warning for you guys, for you Christians. Watch out, because I think that's coming.
Well, this lack of epistemology is part of the problem, and it's connected to this lack of apologetics and this biblical illiteracy problem. All these things are connected, and you can tell that a Christian doesn't know anything about epistemology when they say to an atheist, "You know that God exists,"
Right.
because they don't know that God exists. Just the fact that that it's clear to them and that the information is available to them and has been made plain to them, it doesn't follow that they actually know it, because knowledge requires assent, and that's not there with an unbeliever. So all we can say is the unbeliever has been shown that this is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the unbeliever knows that it's true. And Christians need to stop telling them that they know what they don't know. And I mean, again, from a Christian perspective, we can treat this completely differently. But Paul was not the kind of person who wanted to bully people into the gospel. He wanted to invite people into the gospel, and that's what Christians need to do. And if they can avoid this epistemological train wreck that I see so often in abusing Romans 1 instead of learning from Romans 1, then I think that things can be a lot better, and I think that we're going to be a whole lot more effective in our ministries, and we're going to be a whole lot more effective in our debates and so on. So Christians learn what it means to know something, and stop saying that you know something when you don't have a proper basis for knowing it. If you do that, you're not going to have any credibility with highly intelligent atheists like Richard here, and people who are sincere like Richard, people who care about people like Richard. And Richard, I think you care about these people who have just made a train wreck of their apologetics and a train wreck of their scripture, their abuse of scripture, and so on. You care about those people as much as you care about anybody else. And I think that you would want people to avoid those mistakes, even if you're not necessarily a believer.
Yeah, and I also want to say that I think we're all truth suppressors. I think truth suppression is probably an evolutionary advantage. Um, However, that's not to say that we can never reach the truth, because we have the fact that we have satellites, and the fact that we have air conditioning. Like, I'm here in Phoenix, and my car is 65 degrees inside, and it's 105 degrees outside. That would not happen if we could not discover true information about the external world. So
Mm-hmm.
we absolutely can find the truth to some fashion, or I wouldn't be in air conditioning talking via satellite to the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we are all truth suppressors to some degree. So, and a big example of that is, if you look at all the religions and all the worldviews, all the atheists, if you look at all 8 billion of us, 6 billion of us, or at least 6 billion of us, are absolutely wrong, and we don't know it. We're absolutely convinced that we're right, and we think the other the other 8 billion people other than us are wrong. But statistically speaking, we are a species of wrongness, and that's the statistical, objective, truth that we have to contend with. So we are truth
that
suppressors when it comes to worldviews.
that sounds like a good science fiction novel. The species of wrongness.
Yes, and hey,
I,
that's just the way it is. We have to deal with that. And a lot of Christians are like, okay, I know that, and I'm cool with it. And a lot of atheists are too, and a lot of Muslims are too. And we all have
well,
reasons as to why that is, but it's a truth about us.
well, I will be the first to admit that I have a strong tendency to be a truth suppressor, and I have to fight that tendency.
So now I can't
Day,
trust you anymore. I win.
that's right.
Just kidding.
Yeah. No,
Oh,
I mean, I had that. I mean, everybody has that tendency, and everybody needs to fight that tendency. And how do we fight that tendency? Self-discipline.
um,
And
I,
go
I do
ahead.
have to run here in a couple minutes.
That's
And
fine.
I wanted to give one shout out to you, theist people, which is that like even when you look at like fine tuning and just the fact that things exist. Like I've got two kids, and one time my 4 year old, somebody was trying to talk her out of being religious, and she was like, "But look at all this stuff." And she had never heard of apologetics. She was just looking out the window, and she was like, "Look at all this stuff." But that's a good argument. So if you say that there are things that are clearly seen, I'll give you that one. You look at all of creation and the fine tuning, whether that's an accident or not, or an agency is behind that or not. I'll give it to you. That seems right.
Hmm.
It seems like the right answer. So if you say that much is clearly seen, then I'll say, okay, yeah, that's. I'll hand you that one. And a lot of atheists won't follow me that far, but I'll give you that one.
Oh
So
well, that
that,
I can't. I just can't trust you anymore, Richard.
right.
You're not a true atheist yet.
And I'm fine with that. That's why I put
Yeah.
atheist in front of it. I'm fine with not being called a real atheist. But
Yeah. Right.
that part, I think, is if it's not clearly seen, it at least seems that way. So I'll give you that
Well,
one.
and see, I think that's the proper use of Romans 1, because Romans 1 is about how obvious it is to people that there's something there beyond just the natural world. And it's also about the wrath of God and about how people have rebelled against God. But the fact remains that there is a sense in which there is evidence there of something beyond the natural world, and it's not nonsense to point that out. That's
Right.
that's just that's a better way to approach this if you're going to engage in a debate or something like that. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's once again, Richard Suttles has been honest and sincere and gracious, and that just reinforces what I think of you and how much I admire you, and how much I enjoy interacting with you and how much I value you as a friend. So I wish we lived in the same town. We could do a lot of hanging out together. It'd be fun.
That
But
would be
I'll
great.
let you go. I need you to know
Okay.
this was designed to be a short podcast, and some people will just breathe a big sigh of relief because of that. And so you're welcome. And we'll sign off right now. And thank you
Okay.
again. And we'll get on and we'll be discussing more things in the near future, Richard. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
It was great to see
Yep.
everybody. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. And so long, everyone.